What if the show that made you laugh the hardest was quietly destroying the very people who made you smile? Good Times premiered in 1974 and became one of the most beloved sitcoms in American television history. Every Friday night, millions of families gathered around their television sets to watch the Evans family navigate poverty, pride, and perseverance in a Chicago housing project. The laughter felt real because the people delivering it were real. But the moment the cameras stopped rolling, something shifted. The smiles faded. The contracts ended. Esther Rolle, Florida Evans. Esther Rolle was 54 years old when she brought Florida Evans to life, and she did it with a dignity that felt less like acting and more like a personal mission. Florida Evans wasn't just a television mother. She was a statement. A strong, loving, uncompromising black woman at the center of an American family, at a time when that image was almost nowhere on television. Esther fought for that image fiercely, both on screen and off. She pushed back against writers, confronted producers, and refused to let the show reduce black characters to punchlines. That courage earned her respect, but cost her friendships within the industry. She became known as difficult, which in Hollywood often simply means principled. Her personal life carried a quieter kind of pain. A 20-year marriage ended without fanfare. She had no children. And, as her health began to decline from diabetes in her later years, she returned each evening to a small apartment rather than the warmth of a family home. The awards kept coming. An Emmy for Summer of My German Soldier, praise for Driving, Miss Daisy, and Rosewood. But the applause echoed in empty rooms. Esther Rolle passed away on November 17, 1998, at the age of 78. She was brought home to Pompano Beach, Florida, and laid to rest with the quiet honor she had always deserved. John Amos, James Evans, Sr. John Amos was 35 years old when he played James Evans, and he played him like a man who understood exactly what that father represented to Black America. Firm, loving, struggling, refusing to quit. The character became iconic almost immediately, but behind the scenes, John was fighting a very different battle. He clashed repeatedly with the show's producers over what he believed was the slow erosion of the black family's dignity on screen. Those battles eventually forced him out. He left Good Times bitter, but he left standing. What came next proved his talent was never the problem. His portrayal of the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots in 1977 drew Emmy nominations and earned him a new generation of admirers. His warmth returned to audiences in Coming to America in 1988. But off camera, 3 marriages collapsed, each leaving deeper fractures than the last. In his final years, a painful public dispute with his own daughter cast a dark shadow over a legacy that deserved better. John Amos passed away on August 21, 2024, at the age of 84. The man who embodied fatherhood for millions spent his final chapter fighting to define his own story on his own terms. Jimmie Walker. Jimmie Walker was 27 years old when he shouted "Dynamite" and accidentally changed his life forever. The catchphrase exploded across America overnight. Jimmie became a star in the truest sense of the word, but stardom arrived with a shadow attached. Critics argued that his comedic style reduced the show's deeper message to slapstick. Co-stars grew frustrated. The set became tense. And Jimmie, despite being one of the most recognizable faces on television, began to feel like an outsider within his own fictional family. After Good Times ended, Hollywood's interest cooled quickly. He found steady ground in stand-up comedy, touring theaters and clubs across America for decades. A role in Airplane kept him visible. Appearances in Scrubs reminded newer audiences he existed. But the big stages never came back. Jimmie Walker is 78 years old today, still performing, still working the crowd. He has spoken openly about choosing solitude over marriage and family, framing it as freedom. Whether that freedom brought him peace or loneliness likely depends on the night you ask him. Bernadette Stannis. Thelma Evans. Bernadette Stannis was only 21 years old when she stepped into the role of Thelma Evans, and she carried herself with a grace that made the character feel effortless. Thelma was smart, dignified, and quietly strong, a reflection of young black womanhood that television rarely celebrated at the time. Bernadette made audiences believe every moment of it. After the show ended, Hollywood proved far less generous than it had seemed. Roles were sparse and inconsistent, but rather than wait for an industry that wasn't calling, she picked up a pen. Her books, including the Situations 101 series, became bestsellers, exploring relationships, self-worth, and the quiet battles that women fight privately. 4 marriages taught her hard lessons about the difference between loving someone's idea of you and loving who you actually are. Today, Bernadette Stannis is 72 years old. She lives in Atlanta, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, occasionally speaking at women's events and reunions. She stepped away from fame on her own terms, and she has never appeared to regret it. Ralph Carter. Michael Evans. Ralph Carter was just 13 years old when he walked onto the Good Times set, and the world looked at that boy and saw something pure. Michael Evans was the conscience of the Evans family, idealistic, outspoken, and achingly hopeful. Ralph brought every bit of that to life with a maturity that stunned audiences and casting directors alike. What many people don't realize is that before Good Times, Ralph had already received a Tony Award nomination for the Broadway musical Raisin at the age of 13, one of the youngest nominees in the history of American theater. But child stardom carries a weight that most adults couldn't shoulder. When the show ended, Hollywood moved on faster than Ralph could follow. He rebuilt quietly, returning to theater, teaching, and music. In 1994, he married and built a stable private life with 5 children. Today, Ralph Carter is 64 years old and still performs occasionally in small New York productions. He represents something rare in this story, a child star who found solid ground and chose to stay there. Janet Jackson. Penny Gordon Woods. She was 11 years old. 11. And she made grown adults cry with a performance about child abuse so raw and believable that viewers wrote letters to the network begging someone to help the little girl on their screens. Janet Jackson's portrayal of Penny Gordon Woods was not a debut. It was an arrival. Nobody who watched those episodes forgot them. What came after is one of the greatest careers in the history of popular music. Control, Rhythm Nation, Unbreakable. Over 100 million records sold, 5 Grammy Awards, a legacy that belongs in the same conversation as anyone who has ever stood behind a microphone. But the journey between that little girl and that legacy passed through grief, public humiliation, broken relationships, and the devastating loss of her brother Michael in 2009. She absorbed all of it and kept singing. Janet Jackson is 59 years old today, living in Las Vegas, raising her son Isa and continuing to perform. The stage, she has said, is the only place where she can truly breathe. Some people are simply born for it.